Welcome to VERSED, the ASCAP podcast. I'm Eric Philbrook. Happy Pride Month, everybody. We want to say a big thank you to all of our LGBTQIA+ members who inspire us to embrace our identities and live out loud. We are so proud to support you and fight for you this month and every other month, too. Coming up, I'll talk to the great and often grandiose Rufus Wainwright about his stunning new album, Unfollow the Rules, the Pride Movement's progress, and his exciting live stream concert on June 10th called Rufus Does Judy at Capitol Studios, where he'll perform the songs from the classic 1961 Judy Garland concert at Carnegie Hall in its entirety, along with special guests Renee Zellweger and Kristen Chenoweth. Tickets are available now at rufuswainwright.com. But first, helping me kick off this episode is a very special guest, a singer, songwriter, and producer. She hails from the great state of Maine, my home state, and has steadily been building a buzz and growing an audience with her imaginative fusion of folk, pop, and indie rock. She's toured around the world and released her fourth full-length album, Even in the Tremor, in 2019. She just released a beautiful behind-the-scenes documentary on YouTube called I Feel a Stillness Growing, where she shares her philosophy of life as a working singer-songwriter. Her name is Ali Spaltro, but she is better known by her stage name, so I am thrilled to welcome the wonderful Lady Lamb. Welcome, Ali. I am so excited to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
I know this was sort of a last-minute reach out to you, but I've been a fan, and I've sort of followed your path for a while now. As I mentioned to you, I grew up in Maine. I was a musician. I also moved to Brooklyn. So we've kind of followed a little bit of the same path, but I'm always excited to meet artists, songwriters that hail from Maine. So I guess my first question to you, for purely selfish reasons, is what was your experience like growing up in Maine as a budding artist?
Well, it was a wonderful place to live, but I will say my dad was in the military, so we didn't actually move back to Maine till I was 14, like a week before I started high school. So it was a super formative time, obviously, but both my parents were born there. And so while I moved around as a kid and lived in different places and moved every 3 years, the family stories and the family lore and traditions and all my extended family, they were all in Maine. So To me, it was like this mystical place. And I always struggled with each place that I moved to, feeling like I belonged there or feeling like I even had enough time to make friends because I knew that I was going to leave again. But when I moved to Maine, I had no other place that I was going to afterwards. So it felt like home. So like it was the first place that I lived where I really felt like, this is where I belong because my family's here, my grandparents and my mom, I can see where my mom grew up and my dad grew up. So it was a really stable place for me to be, especially as I started to make art, which I started out with photography and painting and film before I moved to music when I was 18, right when I graduated.
Right. So did you find a community or some collaborators or other people you were able to share sort of this love for creation
Absolutely. With? I think art kids, like arty kids, they always find each other in school. And I certainly did that. And just an aside too, is that, a lot of my closest friends growing up were not only the art kids, but they ended up being gay. And we maybe at certain ages, we didn't know it yet. We weren't out or we weren't aware, but looking back, we found each other. And I will say that when I started making music, I did it as a very solitary thing. I worked at a video store, like the independent store in my hometown, and it was in a basement. So I worked the closing shift, and my boss was the only person who knew that I was starting to write songs, and he gave me permission to be down there after hours. So for months, I did that completely alone and in secret. But then finally, it was my boss who urged me to try to play a show. And so I played my first show in Portland, and through that, I ended up making friends and meeting all the musicians in the scene, which was around 2008 and 2009. And the Portland music scene was it was so great and so vivid and alive. And I just fit right into it. And that was what gave me the confidence to ultimately end up moving to New York in 2010.
Um, okay, we'll get there, but I guess I first want to ask, did you start out as Lady Lamb, the beekeeper? Was that a concept that or an idea that you formed before you actually started playing out?
Yes, before I started playing out, but it was really that I didn't have a moniker for a few months while I was writing, and essentially I had recorded 10 songs and I wanted to share them anonymously in my town because right next to the video store was the record store. And so my plan was to burn them to CD and put them at the counter on the counter for free and just see what happened. It was
Oh, great.
the first time that I ever shared anything, but my town was so this is now that we're in this time where there are no more video stores.
Oh, yeah.
It's a funny thing to say, but everyone in my town rented at the video store. So everybody knew me by name. And I was just too shy. I didn't want the music to be linked back to me next door. So I knew that I wanted a moniker. And at the time that I was writing, I was just so inspired. And I had a notebook by my bed and I was trying to lucid dream. I was writing lyrics in the middle of the night, this kind of thing. And Lady Lamb the Beekeeper was written in my notebook. One morning when I woke up, I saw it and I didn't have a recollection of writing it, but it was right when I had these songs that I wanted to share. So I just, without thinking much about whether it would stick, I just threw that on the record, the CDs that I put up the counter.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. I love that story. So as you started performing, gaining fans, meeting more musicians, obviously this is. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Portland. It's a very exciting, it's a very welcoming place for artists of all kinds. At what point did you decide to move to Brooklyn, which is also a great place for art and for creators of all types?
It was a couple things. I will say it was like the real kicker was that I had this beautiful 1993 Cadillac Coupe de Ville, and I didn't realize that the frame was rotted. And so essentially my car broke down and I was thinking that I might actually move to Boston first. But when I didn't have my car, I was like, no, I'm not moving to Boston without a car. It just seemed pretty dismal. So I just knew like, okay, I ultimately want to be in New York and I know it's super walkable. So that was what prompted me to actually just go straight to New York. But basically I just really organically played shows and made fans and got local press until I was able to sell out my own shows in town. And I just felt like at the time I had kind of hit the ceiling of what I could achieve there. And that's the sort of unfortunate thing about the scene in Portland is that it's so great, but then you do hit a wall where you have to make a decision. Like, do I want to be like a big fish in a small pond or not, and see where I can go? And I just had so many ambitions, and that's why I felt like it was time to leave. And so I was in the scene for about 2 years before I headed on.
Right. So in 2019, you released your fourth full-length album, Even in the Tremor. Were you able to tour behind that, or what was the rollout of that? With the onset of the pandemic and all.
My timing on that record could not have been better. I was so fortunate. That came out in April 2019, and I toured on it, on and off, of course, from April 2019 till literally the day of the shutdown in March, when I was headed to my last little tour of the campaign. So I was able to do multiple US tours, headline and support, and Europe. And the only tour that got canceled was a 2-week tour with a string quartet. But that was the last tour before the campaign was just wrapping itself up.
Wow. So you would have naturally have just sort of taken a break after all that.
At the end of March, yeah, I was going to take a break.
Yeah.
I did.
So what has sustained you through all these dark months?
Well, I again, very fortunate timing. I'm going to be hit by a bus any day now based on this, but essentially my sister, I found out my younger sister was pregnant with her first baby, like the first baby in our family, and we're very close. So when I found this out, it was right before I went on the road for Even in the Tremor, and I ended up moving out of my apartment and living out of my suitcase for the whole year of that campaign. And that whole year while I was on the road, I was looking at houses in Maine and like saving all my money that I wasn't putting into Brooklyn rent. And so basically in January of 2020, I found my dream house. It was ridiculously in my price range, and it was 20 minutes from my family. And long story short, I closed on it the day I got the keys on March 11th. Then I flew to New York to get my quartet, and then we started driving to Atlanta, and on our drive to Atlanta, the tour was canceled. So what I did was I went back, I took my band home back to New York, we turned around, I dropped them off, I went to my storage unit in Queens, and I got things I could fit in the minivan, and I drove right to Maine, and that's where I was. I had the keys, I just moved into my empty house, the world went insane, and I was just hiding out there alone for 4 months. So basically that's what I did. I spent the year really occupied on house projects, and I also was able to do shows on my property because I had 2 acres. So by the end of August, I had formulated this whole plan and set it into motion to have like safe, socially distanced shows. And I was able to do 12 of them before it got too cold. And that was amazing. So I definitely had some good distractions.
Wow. Well, good for you. That's wonderful. I'm a little jealous. So you also just released a film, I Feel a Stillness Growing, which gives us a little peek into your main world.
Right.
What inspired you to make this film, and just tell us a little bit about what prompted it.
I didn't know that this was going to end up being a short film. Because really what the idea was that back in May of 2019 on my headline tour for Even in the Tremor, one of the last shows of the tour was the homecoming show in Brooklyn at Elsewhere in Bushwick. And so I had a good friend of my guitar player is a filmmaker, Jonah Lorsung, who made this. And basically he was living in Brooklyn, and the idea was that he was just going to follow me around for the couple of days that I was in Brooklyn and then film the show and backstage and all of that. But we obviously had no idea about, back then I didn't own the house or anything. Yeah. So he kind of sat on that footage for a long time. And then he ended up calling me in September of last year and was like, hey, I've been in Iowa with my family this whole time, but I see that you're doing these shows at your house. He was like, the footage that I got of you has been on my mind because I want to finish that, but I need to round out the story somehow. What do you think about me coming to Maine and following you for a couple of days there and talking to you about how your life has changed? And so that's how the film came to be. He basically just had the energy and the motivation and the narrative to put a cap on it, and he worked really hard on it from September till this spring and sent it to me, and here we are. It's a beautiful little film. I think it encapsulates a time in my life that is, I think, also relatable because it takes place during this year we've just had.
Yes, it's very beautiful, it's very soulful, and I encourage everyone to go check that out. So it's Pride Month, which is really, a celebration of freedom of expression. In your own experience, how has discovering, identifying, and expressing yourself as gay shaped your music in any way?
It has shaped it in ways. I'll just be so honest about this. I came out in 2005. I was 15. Okay. And I fell in love with my friend, and we ended up having a relationship. And so at the time I wasn't making music, but every song I've ever written, starting from the first day that I first wrote a song, was always a response to my sexuality. But in 2007, I was out in my life. Mm-hmm. My family accepted me, all my friends. I had such a safe space to be myself. And I was so lucky. I never questioned my identity. It was like when I discovered this about myself, something clicked into place, and I was nothing but elated. I was only relieved. Like I'm so lucky that I didn't struggle with my identity, and I think that has a lot to do with the people who are around me.
Right.
Um, but so my sort of like expression of that came out in very subtle ways. So like what's funny is over the years I never publicly outed
Right.
I never made a statement, but somehow all the young queer kids found me anyway. Like they found me and they just knew that these songs were about women and this, you know, the struggle of love. And I will also be vulnerable and say that early on, between especially the early years, I was mortified of publicly coming out because I was really scared of being pigeonholed. This was like 2010 or something, where
Right.
it was more of a it was more common that if you came out as an artist, it was all you were going to be asked about. And I felt like such an introvert at the time. I never felt like I wanted to be what I was afraid I'd be put on on a soapbox or something, and I'd have to
Right.
be political. And I didn't feel interested in that at the time. And I felt actually very afraid of that. So I never denied it, but I never invited being asked about it because I didn't want that to be the main focus.
Right.
Having said that, now it's 10 years later or whatever, and I see all these artists who their narrative is more about that. And I think it's beautiful and wonderful. And in ways I wish that I had been a little braver about it and not been so hell-bent on being worried about people's perception of me.
Right. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the music that really speaks for who you are as an artist. No matter what content or pronouns it contains. Um, just a little bit more about this past year. It's been challenging for so many people, more so for some than others. It's brought out the worst in people. It's brought out the best. But there have been some silver linings. Most notably in people coming together, taking to the streets, really speaking out about all these issues. Do you feel, in terms of LGBTQ rights and awareness, there is sort of a greater understanding and a greater propensity for people to talk about it and speak out about it?
I think, yes, I think what this year has done is it's brought all of our issues in humanity to the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been sort of like just a expedited situation of having to look at inequality and really face it and really identify it and stop being in denial about it on every front. And that obviously includes gay rights. And I think that it's really hard for me to say if I think that people are more understanding of gay rights, but I think that the awareness is there due to visibility. I think more than ever this year has really brought about visibility of queer people, trans people, queer rights, trans rights, trans people of color, like the fact that people in high places and people with power are realizing that what they can do is they can give queer people a platform for visibility so that young people see themselves on screen. And the idea being that it's that one day we get to a place where it's not a taboo and it's not this big thing, it's people are just accepted. And I feel hopeful that that's what visibility does. And that's what this year has really allowed space for.
Yes, absolutely. Very well said. As the world opens up, we're not going back to the same world. There's going to be a lot that's different, and a lot that people appreciate probably more than they did before. What are you most hopeful for in the days ahead, or what are you looking forward to in terms of inspiration and joy?
That's such a sweet question because I am so inspired by people and I've missed people and I've missed their faces. And I think that, like you said, like we're not going back to the same world and we shouldn't. That's the thing. Like we shouldn't go back to the same world. The idea is that we should actually use this as an opportunity. And I know we've all said this, so it's becoming to, like, we've all heard this and it's maybe becoming a little tired, but it's the point. Like, we should see this as an opportunity to actually be more vulnerable and more open and more communicative about our fears, our differences, our vulnerabilities, inequality, all of these things, inequities. So what I'm hopeful for is that this is some sort of sea change, even in some small way, toward renewal, which I think we're all kind of experiencing with spring and with vaccines and all of this. And so I really hope that we can stay aware of this as an opportunity. And I'm hopeful for that. I'm hopeful for openness. And for me, that's inspiring. I want to see people being open with each other, even strangers. Like, I want to see these small micro moments, which inspire me in music so much. And I write about them. Like, my lyrics are often about what I'm observing. And so I feel hopeful that seeing that is what's going to inspire me to write some strong work.
Wow, that's great. On that note, Allie, I just want to say I've loved talking to you, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. Keep the music flowing, keep in touch, and hopefully we'll see you out there on the trail sooner than later.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erica. It has really been a pleasure.
Praised by the New York Times for his genuine originality, Rufus Wainwright has established himself as one of the great male vocalists, songwriters, and composers of his generation. The New York-born, Montreal-raised singer-songwriter has released 10 studio albums to date, 3 DVDs, and 3 live albums, including the Grammy-nominated Rufus Does Judy at Carnegie Hall. He has collaborated with artists such as Elton John, Burt Bacharach, Robert Wilson, David Byrne, Boy George, Joni Mitchell, Pet Shop Boys, Heart, Robbie Williams, Jesse Norman, Billy Joel, Paul Simon, Sting, and producer Mark Ronson, among many others. He has also written 2 operas, numerous songs for movies and TV, and is currently working on his first musical. His Grammy and Juno-nominated album, Unfollow the Rules, finds Wainwright at the peak of his songwriting and musical powers, entering artistic maturity with passion, honesty, and a newfound fearlessness. Next week, on June 10th, Rufus will present a live-stream concert, Rufus Does Judy at Capitol Studios, his latest recreation of the classic 1961 Judy Garland concert. He will be performing in the same studio and even using the same microphone that Garland used for some of her historic recordings. He will be joined by Renee Zellweger, who won an Oscar for portraying Judy Garland on film, and Broadway star Kristen Chenoweth. In addition, a limited t-shirt created for the event, made in partnership with legendary designer Michael Kors, will be available at Rufus's merch store. All proceeds from sales of the t-shirt will benefit the LGBT human rights organization Outright Action International throughout Pride Month in June. Now, here is my conversation with the great Rufus Wainwright. Hello, Rufus.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a privilege and an honor to talk to you. I've seen you a few times in performance over the years, but I must say it was a real treat to see you last January at Sundance.
Yeah.
Performing songs from your upcoming album at that point. The world turned shortly after that, and you did eventually release that album. But before we get into your special event next week, I want to talk to you a little bit about that album, because it was your first studio album of original songs in about 8 years, and it was your 8th studio album. You described it as your first album of maturity as a songwriter. What did you mean by that?
Well, that sounds like it was a paraphrase, maybe, of what something I was trying to be more general about. No, I mean, I think that I think how I defined the whole process with the last record was that, my first album, Rufus Wainwright, was made in Los Angeles, and at that point, I was signed to DreamWorks Records by Lenny Waronker, and it was this very illustrious situation, and I had carte blanche, and you know, the album took 3 years to make, and I was working with John Bryan, and we had all these, you know, we were at Ocean Way for months and months. Anyway, so it was this very very beautiful experience and very lavish experience. So now I'm back in LA, and 20 years have passed, and I wanted to sort of make an album that was sort of the mirror image of that project, that first record, where yes, I used a lot of the same studios, some of the same musicians, people like Jim Keltner, and but that, you know, we don't have the budget, we don't have the time, and we don't have necessarily, you know, a major, though I do work with BMG, who are fantastic, but it's just like a different system, shall we say,
Right.
than existed before, and just what that would sound like. And I feel that in a lot of ways, and this is especially with help from Mitchell Froom, the producer,
Yes.
where you know, we were just, everything became far more distilled, far more direct, far more kind of basic, you know, of what do we really need here, and
Right.
because we can only afford so much, and I think therefore made it more mature in a lot of ways. You know, there was less superfluous stuff. So yeah. So I think that's what ended up happening. I love both records. One is
Right, of
more
course.
whimsical, maybe, but both. But I think they're variations on a theme.
Do you feel like you've grown as a lyricist? I mean, obviously, you know, you've been writing songs all these years.
Yeah, I work really hard as a lyricist. I don't know if I've grown at all, but I work very hard at it.
Say, are you attracted to the same themes? Like, do you feel like you go back to these same sort of motifs in
Yeah.
your work, or do you feel like, you know, you've arrived at a point where you want to explore some other ideas?
Yeah. Well, that's a tough question in a certain way, because I think the themes remain the same. It's just the context is different, you know, and
Right.
there's always longing, there's always escapism, there's always, you know, also kind of search for truth as well.
Right.
But they're different, they're far different kind of contours that I have to contend with, you know, with like, at this point I've experienced death multiple times.
Right.
I'm a dad. I've been married for years, so it's sort of the lens has changed, but it probably is the same themes.
Right. So your muse has led you down some interesting paths throughout your career. Um, you've written 2 operas, you've written for
Yeah.
film, you've tackled Shakespeare.
Yeah.
But your Rufus Does Judy concert at Carnegie Hall was definitely a creative high mark.
Yes.
And for those who may not know the history of Judy Garland's concert at Carnegie Hall in 1961, can you give us a little history
Yeah.
lesson and what
Yeah.
led you to recreate it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, she had been, you know, probably the biggest star on earth for a long time. I mean, and considering how successful her movies were, and she coupled that with, you know, a concert career, which I think went well. Though I think as her, you know, what is it, her value dipped. She had to go out on the road more, and life became more difficult. And of course, she was, you know, struggling with addiction and trauma, certainly, you know,
Right.
from her rather complicated life. Though she obviously had a good time too. You know, they thought she was kind of a has-been, and that it was, you know, the story had ended. But then she did these 2 shows at Carnegie Hall, and it was one of the greatest comebacks in show business history. You know, it just the shows themselves were legendary, but then the album subsequently was one of the, you know, top selling albums for many years. So so yeah, so it was this kind of testament to her 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 toughness, and also her, you know, her desire to her tenacity, I should say, her
Right.
tenacity. So, and her talent as well. I just wanted to celebrate that. I, and I redid the show about 20 years ago myself, almost, and I've done it sort of every 10 years as a kind of exercise in singing, and also in the Great American Songbook, because obviously the show is also about the songs, which
Right.
are some of the best ever written, and now during, you know, COVID, and at the end of the pandemics, let's hope for the moment, I felt it would be nice to kind of celebrate once more with that material, and we booked some time at Capitol Studios, which is in the Capitol Records building, and I did the show with a little ensemble, and with special guest Kristen Chenoweth and my sister Martha Wainwright, and our special guest audience member is Renee Zellweger. So I'm sort of singing to her the whole time,
Oh,
which is
that's wonderful.
appropriate since she's now intimately tied to Judy in a lot of ways. So yeah, so it's a celebration of survival, I think.
It's a great way to
Which
put it.
is, yeah,
Appropriate in these days, in this era. Um,
yes,
Tenacity
yes,
and survival are
yeah,
themes we all can relate to.
yes,
Is there something more challenging to perform? What is it? 30 songs
yeah, yeah.
From the American Songbook, more so than if it was a set of your own music. Do you feel
Uh,
like
yeah, yeah. I mean, they're more. Well, yes. I say that. My songs are pretty hard too. I don't know. I mean, I feel that with the Judy material, you have to be more, there's more scrutiny, shall we say, from the audience. There's, you know, real aficionados. In fact, there's a lot of people who don't like my of my renditions of her music, and who were kind of, you know, gunning for me to fail. But and then there's ones who are pro Rufus. So it's more of a battle, shall we say. So I guess it's more challenging athletically. Um, Whereas I think with my own music, I can kind of drift into my, you know, my own personal space. But that being said, it's I never make it easy on myself, no matter what. So
that wouldn't be fun? Well, the songs are nearly almost all ASCAP songs. So
wow,
this concert is a real
yeah, it's an ASCAP concert. Yeah,
advertisement for the ASCAP repertory. So thanks for keeping that alive. Um,
yes,
so you just recently released Over the Rainbow, which is part of this
yes,
show that people will
yes,
see next week. The song is part of everyone's life in some
yes.
way, but particularly in yours. You want to explain why this song it
Yeah.
means so
Yeah,
much to
well, this,
you?
I mean, I'm part of I'm 47, and I think when I was about 4 or 5, 3 or 4 or 5, um, there still wasn't VCRs. I think they just came around the time I was maybe 7 or 8. So you couldn't rent movies, you know, really, or maybe there was like weird like beta machines or something, but we didn't have any of that in Canada. But so you couldn't rent movies, and so any kind of old movie you saw was on TV,
Right.
and it was an event, you know, and certainly the Wizard of Oz was a yearly event. It was on during Easter every year, and the whole family would sit down and watch it, because that was the only time you could see it, unless it was like in a repertory theater. So yeah, so that and a lot of, and maybe because of its, you know, proximity to Easter, and, you know, my latent Catholicism or something, and being gay, you know, I sort of treated it as somewhat of a religious experience, and the song was, I know I always gravitated towards that song, and my mother, Kate McGarrigle, the late great Kate McGarrigle, she caught on to this, and then it would accompany me singing it, and it became this kind of emblem for me as a very small child, to sing that song at parties, or
Right.
for people, and so much so that when I met Lorna Luff for the first time, Judy's daughter, I unashamedly, you know, stated at the beginning of our conversation, I was like, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, that's my song. And she was like, no, it was written for my mother. Like, I thought I owned it,
Right.
so it's just, so obviously I'm very connected to it, perhaps a bit too much so.
Well, well, at the ASCAP office in New York City, we have Harold Arlen's actual piano
Wow.
on which he
Wow.
wrote that song. So the next time you're in
Okay. Oh,
town,
right. That's amazing. I gotta
co-
come. Okay.
come on by and
I will be there.
give it a go.
I will be there.
Um, so you mentioned your mother, the great Kate McGarrigle. Your father is Loudon Wainwright III. Your family is
Yeah.
musical.
Yeah. Yeah.
You are now a father yourself now.
Yeah.
What kind of father are you? Are you? Did you take the lessons of your upbringing
Yeah.
and flip it in what
Well,
you're
yeah, I mean,
passing on?
I have tried my hardest to, I do believe that when you become a parent and, you're able to kind of accept that fact and focus on it, and especially I think with COVID as well, just having all this time suddenly to really be
Right.
there and really examine, your role in all of this. Yeah, there are so many opportunities one has to rectify some of the wrongs that happened to you as a kid, and especially considering that that when I was brought up in the 70s and 80s, it was a very different time. There weren't the resources uh, that are available now, and therefore I can I can do a better job because there is help available. So it's yeah, yeah, I think it is. I mean, it's funny because I mean, I think that my parents, the baby boomers, they, in terms of parenting, there's some issues. But you can't really totally blame them because, so much happened with the sexual revolution and divorce and drug, it was a very traumatic time. I think a lot more about my grandparents who were
Right.
actually, they were just, low, no drama, be around, kind of
Right.
steady, keep it steady kind of thing. And so I think that's a generation that I've actually been observing a lot because sometimes I think for now it can get a little too involved, a little too helicoptery, always wondering how they're doing and stuff. So there's a lot to contend with and a lot to examine.
Wow. But it's all fun, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so today marks the start of Pride Month. Um,
yes,
when when you first emerged, as someone on the national stage, you were called and this might be paraphrasing too, the first post-liberation era gay pop star.
yeah, yeah.
Um, was that? Were you aware that you were
Well,
being passed that
yeah,
baton
yeah.
at the
Well, I mean,
time?
I knew what I was at the time. I didn't necessarily put too much faith in it or importance. I mean, I just wanted to make great records and write great songs and find my my tribe. So it wasn't there was no kind of calculated nature to it. But that being said, I mean, I coined it early on. It's that of all of them, I'm the second out gay pop star who started their career out
Right.
on a major label. The first was Jabriath, and also I think Sylvester's in there too. So there's I'm not yeah, there's Sylvester and Jabriath, incredible artists. Um, and then there's me. So it's either second or third, but who really began their career out of the closet. I mean, sure, there's plenty of other ones who were gay, like Elton John and all
Right.
of that, but none of them were honest about it at the outset. But I was, and that's sort of, I don't know what that represents, but that's what I am.
Right. Um, did you bear did you feel any sense of responsibility to live up to someone's expectation
Well,
of you?
I didn't have much to live up to in terms of expectations, because there was nobody I could really, emulate. So I had to kind of make it up as I went along. What I did is that I focused on high art and high culture, meaning, literature, opera, Jacques Cocteau and Oscar Wilde and people in Tchaikovsky, whatever. That kind of I was like, look, if they can make it in those times and create such incredible things, I should be able to do something, vaguely good now.
Right. So what is your prognosis of the progress that has been made since that time? Like when you look at the landscape.
I had a more positive outlook a few more years ago. I think once the Trump years came and a lot of this sort of veneer was rubbed off, and the kind of true nature of certain sectors' feelings were revealed, it's pretty scary. And whether it's here or in, Eastern Europe or Africa, I mean, there's being gay or being LGBTQ, I should say, is a tricky game at the moment. I feel fortunate that I'm here in the United States, even though it's not perfect. But I think often of people in like Iran or other countries where it's, it's like a huge humanitarian crisis, that isn't really given that much attention, really.
Right. Well, it does seem like it is in the headlines. It is in the news more. Yeah. And so I think your average person is probably more aware of these issues. More aware. So that would be a positive thing. Yeah. What advice would you give to a young music creator, artist emerging now, who's maybe hasn't found the courage to kind of go their own way?
I just, what I say to everyone starting out, it's going to take 10 years. It'll take 10 years, regardless. Whether you, and for me, I was fortunate that I started at 14. So I think by the time I was, 24, I was pretty seasoned at that point. So doesn't mean you won't have sex, have success. Sorry, it's getting a little. You will have sex. Don't worry, you will have sex. But I don't think you really know what you're doing until you've done it for 10 years as an artist, really.
Right.
And if you don't know what you're doing after 10 years, then stop.
No, that's good advice. So as the world emerges from this crazy time, and artists are just so eager to get out there and perform in front of real audiences, large audiences. Yeah. What do you, what is your hope? Things aren't going to be quite the same, but what is your hope for this new world?
Well, I hope, I have to say, just being the pragmatic person I am and also living here in California, I'm, for me, it's the environment. I mean, let's deal with the greenhouse gases and the killing of endangered animals and forests being cut down. I mean, and that to me is also the great equalizer in the sense that, this is something that everybody as a human, whether you're gay, straight, black, white, woman, male, we all have to deal with just as a planet. So my great hope is that we're able to really rescue this planet environmentally. That's where I'm going to put all my eggs.
Great. In the meantime, we have great music to sustain us.
Yes.
So I just want to let people know that if they want to take part in your concert, your Rufus Does Judy at Capitol Studios concert.
Yes.
They can go to rufuswainwright.com and
Veep. It's on veeps.com. Rufus Wainwright, veeps.com. Veep.com or something like. You'll find it.
Okay. You can access that through your website.
Yes.
And thank you so much, Rufus. You've been nothing but an inspiration to us. Thank you for being part of the ASCAP family.
Thank you. And I'm coming by to check out that piano.
Anyway, I'll let you go.
Okay.
Cheers. And
thank you.
We'll see you out there on the trail somewhere.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. The ASCAP Experience joins in the celebration of Pride Month with the presentation of a panel called Labelless, Songwriting Without Borders. The session, which will be featured on ASCAP's Instagram Live next Wednesday, June 9th at 3 p.m. Eastern, features music creators The Blossom, Alison Ponthier, and Madeline the Person. They will talk about how they are challenging the idea that to be successful, you need to conform to standard constructs of gender identity and sexual orientation, as well as dated music ideals regarding genre. And if you missed last month's panel called Roadmap to a Release, you can watch it and all of our panels on demand at ASCAPexperience.com. Here's a clip where ASCAP's Beth Brinker talks to Strategic Heights Media's Simone Smalls about the importance of video to a successful music release strategy.
Simone, when you guys are working on strategy, is that something that you think about, how video assets can be released through different social platforms?
Yes, video assets play a huge part in releasing, and putting out and to the world and what an artist represents. So if there's, if there's enough video content there's a big strategy that we put behind it. One, for social, but also just for, with the digital media outlets, because you can have a social media plan, but then you can also have a digital media plan of how you want to release certain, video or any type of content, even photo content, to the world and to the media. So there might be one, we might want to do a certain video for maybe like Rolling Stone and give it as an exclusive to Billboard. But then for social media, we may want to give it, we want to have them release it through social media as well. So, as much video content, I always tell artists, the more video content you have, the better, because it allows us to do so many different things with strategy and doing for a social media plan, a digital media plan, and just, for an overall artist representation and for overall artist visual. It's good to just have that, because then we're also, the timeline also is, if you want to put out something during something seasonal, given what's happening on the calendar, you can put that out. If you have something that's happening around, even if you recorded something around where an artist is singing something for like Mother's Day, and you're putting that out, around Mother's Day or around Valentine's Day, like whatever that is, all of that video content really, really helps the strategy, and it actually helps build an artist profile as you go along the way. And even if you're doing covers of other artists, sometimes that's even a great thing to do, because fans are getting to hear what you sound like and how you may cover an artist song, or how you might interpret, an artist song that you love, but it's completely different in the way that they recorded it. So all of that video content, in my opinion, would be, it's the best thing that an artist can have along with photos, especially right now in this digital world that we're in and everything that's happened with the pandemic. I mean, everything is digital right now. Everything is virtual. Why not keep recording all of this visual content and all of these videos so that you can release them at a certain time and just keep teasing the audience? The more you tease, the more video content you have, the more you're able to tease and increase your following.
Well, that's a wrap. If you want to sample any of the music mentioned in this episode and learn more about the artists, visit ascap.com/versed. Thanks to everyone who made this episode possible: Lady Lamb, Rufus Wainwright, Beth Brinker, and Simone Smalls. And thanks as always to Eitan Rosenblum and Sarah Feingold for editorial, Rachel Choi for graphic design, Kate Cordova for social media support, Sam Hollander and Josh Edmondson for our theme music, and Benjamin Keynes of Sight Sense Productions for audio and video editing. Thanks for listening, and remember, less labels, more love. See you back here next time.